We are live.
Cool. Thank you everyone for joining Consensus Call number 99. This is issue 667 in the PM repo. Link shared in the chat. We will, as usual, hit Capella 4844, then more general open discussion around spec and research. First of all, I think there was a doozy of a call last week on the all core devs execution layer call. I did want to recap what I think is maybe the most relevant conclusions for this group. Obviously, a lot of us have opinions about what goes into the EVM, but let's keep it targeted on the consensus layer and what we see as the next couple of upgrades coming. My understanding is that we shall keep withdrawals independently specified and worked on in Capella, and that 4844 will remain its own specification, and that, I think importantly, even in the event that these things were, say, in some world ready at the same time, even though that's not the intention right now, that we still wouldn't combine the specifications and stagger the upgrade. But I think that crucially, I think what was made clear by consensus layer teams is that they believe that 4844 is not in nearly the same readiness as withdrawals. Coupling them would significantly delay withdrawals. We will not couple them. We will work full steam ahead on Capella in its current form while parallelizing the 4844 work still. Is that correct? Is that the general understanding of the teams on this call? Does anybody not
what
agree?
we like from Nimbus.
Sorry, what was that, Yasik?
That was that's what we like from Nimbus. Yeah,
Okay,
makes sense.
great. I will instead ask, instead of affirmation, any dissent. Okay, cool. Again, most of that was hashed out on the previous call. If you're listening to this, you can go check that out on all core devs. Great, so let's move into our items for today. Capella, does anybody have just a general progress update with respect to testnets and other coordination items?
I think I would be responsible for that. So we are currently running 2 testnets for withdrawals. This does not include any 4844 implementation, only strictly the withdrawal part. So currently how it looks like is we are able to do full withdrawals. We did a testing with Lodestar, Lighthouse, Teku, and Prism. Prism is not able to start from post-Genesis merge just yet. They're working on it, and that's why we have currently 2 different testnets. So one of the testnets is the pre-merge, and the other one is the post-merge. And the post-merge has Prism, Lodestar, Lodestar, Lighthouse, Teku, Geth, Nethermind, and Bazoo on them. And the other one is, we just started that today, started over again, and we started to begin testing BLS to execution changes. So that one currently runs Prism, Lighthouse, Teku, and Geth, and Nethermind. Because Bazoo still doesn't have the Shanghai by Epoch implementation. We are awaiting for that. That should be done quite soon again. And as far as I know, Nimbus and Erigon doesn't yet have any implementation for withdrawals. That's why we wasn't able to test with those.
A couple things there. What's the Nimbus status? I mean, you said from the Nimbus team, where do we stand on getting withdrawals?
Were these a request regarding the consensus layer or the execution layer? On the consensus layer, we are currently building out the spec, or we are pretty close to kind of running local simulations. And the immediate next goal would be to joining this the internal op repo.
Great. And then on the BLS change operation, do we have tooling for testing that? What are we utilizing for that?
We use it do, and Prism is just
Nice.
testing it right now. But it should be Lighthouse and Teku also. Lodestar has something in draft and should be available, I think, within a week or two. So then we can also include Lodestar in the testnet for that.
Great. I would recommend we, so there's obviously getting into local mempool and block packing with those operations. Another is testing the gossip operation. So it might be valuable to insert them into a node that is not running validators. And then if it's picked up by other nodes, we know that the gossip is working well. Okay, cool. Anything on the Capella testnets?
Well, I
This
just
is the
logged in
Capella
at the
testnet.
right time.
Danny, this is the Capella testnet. Or what
Yeah,
did
sorry.
you mean?
Anything else?
Oh, anything else? Not really. So this BLS execution, it's very fresh. Like we started maybe 2 hours ago. That's why I don't have that many stuff to say about it yet. But the full withdrawal we tested a couple of weeks ago already, and full withdrawals work just fine when the withdrawal address is a 0x01 style.
So BLS
So that-
changes are being submitted, and we tested that we can submit to the pool more than the allowed maximum on a block, and the pool is accepting them and just sending them on the maximum per block. Other nodes are taking this. We are not broadcasting them yet on the P2P on GoZip. We'll test this right now.
Cool.
So basically, the future plans are that we're going to migrate these two testnets into a single testnet, and we would like to include all clients in that one. And that's going to be a bit longer lived one also. But for that, I would like to wait for Bezu to implement their Shanghai based on Epoch, and I would like to include Nimbus also. And we will do that once Prism is able to start from post merge Genesis, which also should come very, very soon.
Great. Okay, next up, let's talk about issue or PR 3095. We did talk about this 2 weeks ago. I think I've generally had agreement on doing this bounded sweep. Alex, is there any update or any question with regard to this before we do a review and get it released?
I don't think so. I've made the bound very small in response to some feedback and added some tests recently. That was a little more involved than I was expecting. But yeah, it should be ready to go. Final review. And then, yeah, the only thing is, yeah, just agreeing that we all want this change.
Okay, I believe that was the general agreement 2 weeks ago. Any dissent on a bounded sweep and it being on the lower end of size? Okay, so I know we have a number of additional tests work in progress right now around some of the more edge cases on multiple balance updates for validators within a single block. So we're going to aim to get some of these new tests and this out by the end of next week for consumption. Sound good? Okay. Anything else regarding Capella? Okay. On 4844, there is a weekly call on Mondays. Is there anything that needs to be percolated up to the larger group today?
So Dapline actually raised an interesting issue recently that I thought was worth bringing up. It has to do with syncing, where like syncing blobs. The general idea is that like we have a lower bound of blobs, like our min, whatever request epochs for storing blobs, but like the actual lower bound seems like it would be the point of finalization. And if that's the case, then do you have scenarios where the chain hasn't finalized within this sort of like prune depth we've defined? Then when you're syncing from Genesis, you don't know where the point of finalization is until you get all the way to the head. So this would mean you'd have to sync like all the way to the head to find where you should have validated all the blobs, and then go back and check that you actually got blobs and blocks from your peers in that space between like where the chain's finalized and where the like prune threshold we have is.
So why are you saying that you should only need to get blobs? Are you saying that you only need to get blobs since finalized?
I'm saying like the minimum bound of where you need to get blobs seems like it's either the point of finalization or like this prune depth that we've defined. And when the point of finalization is like further in the past than this prune depth, there's some tough scenarios that make it seem like you'd have to sync to the head and then go back and double check you got all these blobs correctly, because you don't really know what the point of finalization is apart from like what your peers tell you their like finalized epoch is.
Right. I don't see the interplay between finalization and the prune depth. If you have what you think is a finalized chain, but you don't have the available blobs, you would consider it unavailable, right? So
The finalized chain, don't have finalized blobs. Well, so I think it's that your peers could tell you an incorrect finalized epoch, and while you're syncing to the head, you sort of have to trust this until you're able to to determine for yourself whether it was finalized. So they could give you an incorrect finalized epoch and then not give you blobs where you would have needed it. So then you'd have like blocks that are actually unfinalized with you couldn't check that the data was available.
yeah. So I claim that I don't see the interplay between finalization and data availability, meaning even if you think something is finalized, you should still be checking data availability so that a malicious majority can't fool you about unavailable data. But maybe I'm missing something here. Proto, you had your hand.
So to clarify, we are talking about the periods of time past the pruning period, so like more than 18 days ago. But if the chain is not finalizing for all that time, then there's a point where you might have part of the chain that you don't have the data
Madame de
for, but it is part
Oui,
of
bonjour Madame
the...
Henri Dubois-Ferrière. Merci, je viens de voir votre email.
Sorry?
Yeah, I muted him, sorry.
Okay, so there's just this part of the chain in this case of non-finality that we will not have the blob data for anymore, so you cannot validate whether or not it should have been considered for finalization. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Just a quick question. Why aren't we tying the period, the removal of the blob data to finalization instead?
So
Like
for
18 days
pruning
after
data,
finality.
oh, like that. Maybe we should.
So in the specs, it's actually spec'd out that you should have data until the finalized epoch as well. So it is there, but the case that I'm trying to get at is where like your peers are, I guess, lying about what the finalized epoch is, and you don't know that they're lying about that until you sync to the head. And so then at that point, you would have to like go back and ask good peers to like double check these blocks that you thought you didn't have to check whether the data was available for. And and then like reprocess
Oh,
that.
because
your chain.
the network, the spec says do the maximum length, whether that be 18 or time since finality.
Right. So like you
But
should
in
have them
general,
in your database. Yeah.
but in general, we can never trust what the other clients are telling us. I mean, how is this unique?
Right.
So
Like
this
we
is-
always assume,
So
you know,
yeah,
benevolence, but verify that.
yeah. So the thing about this is like you assume this, but you're able to verify this as you sync forward in sync usually. But in this case, it's like you'll be syncing forward. As you're syncing forward, you have to like trust about the validation of the block, that like your peers aren't going to give you blobs according to like their view of finalization, I guess. So the difference is that like you can still sync to the head, and then at that point you know what the actual finalized checkpoint should be, and then you like can reprocess those blocks. But the like I'm bringing this up, I guess, to I guess make more people aware that this scenario could introduce a lot of complexity, because we don't have to like reprocess blocks during sync in other parts of like the consensus layer. Like we have to do it for optimistic sync for like consensus layer, execution layer sync, but this would be like unique to consensus layer. A strange edge case that potentially introduces a lot of complexity is most of my point.
I'd like to understand it better. So we have this fork choice tree. You sync one path of that from some pair. The pair can claim whatever. You verify the data that you pull. And when you verify all of the state transition. You verify the finalization that happens during the state transition. And for at least the last 18 days worth of data, you should have the blobs downloaded. And if not, then you cannot persist that part of the chain. And then there's this edge case with non-finality for more than 18 days. And then there's another edge case with I think I got this right. I'm not sure how to best describe this edge case, where the blob data period is shorter than the finalization end, and you want to download more blobs. In that case, I think we might not even want to download the blobs and change the spec there. So where does the complexity, where does it get introduced? Assuming we can simplify the spec to say, always verify the last 18 days and just verify the finalization like today without for.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to think about that, but I think generally it's like we'd have to introduce another form of like optimistic processing of blocks. But yeah, I'll think about what you're proposing more, I guess.
Wait, so the spec says that you cannot import a block unless there's a blob, right? So for forward syncing case, that if you don't have a blob, then you just cannot import it. Are you talking about potentially moving that into more like an optimistic model?
No, so you should require the blob for data that is less than 18 days old. But then there is some doubt whether or not to change that based on finality, especially in the case of like long non-finality.
Okay, so there is a PR open with, I believe, this explained on 3141 on the consensus specs repo. I need to take a look at this to have a more intelligent conversation about it. Do you think that we can make progress here today, or that we should move to this PR?
Let's discuss in the PR.
Yeah, I agree.
I would just ask the question, is there any problem tying removal of blobs to the finality instead of, I guess, wall clock?
Do you mean even in the event where you're finalizing in 2 epochs, removal of blobs?
Yeah. I mean, you're finalizing into epochs, so you keep data for, 20 epochs past
Yeah,
that or
so
whatever.
I mean, one argument would be that a malicious majority can fool you if you're offline for an epoch and you come back online. There are certainly debates as to what the prune depth should be.
It also removes our guarantee of constrained state growth, theoretically.
No, it doesn't. Because the chain can only go on for, what is it, a month before it dies. If there's no finality.
If there's no finality, it'll leak for a
fixed.
month. Well, so it'll leak for a month, but then the new set can continue leaking. So from a theoretical standpoint, this is unbounded. Like you can just have, 75% leak out, and then the remaining 25% then fail to achieve finality, and they start leaking out, and the remaining 25% fail to achieve finality, they leak out,
Yeah.
and you can repeat this forever, theoretically. I recognize this is very low odds, but
No, because finally everybody leaks out. But at
yeah,
some
that's true. I guess
point,
we do round to 1 at some point, right?
and
Yeah,
the second
1,000
point is that like some of the validators stay in there, those that didn't leak out, and I guess reasonably those cause finality at the point where the leaky ones are finally exited.
Yes, that would be a reasonable expectation of what should happen, but it's not theoretically guaranteed. Again, my argument here is just like it's an edge case. We are currently asserting very strongly that there is a very finite amount of state that can be contained by these blobs. This would change that to a more of a economic guarantee rather than a hard guarantee, which is probably still fine, but I think we should just recognize that.
It's a fair point, and it's that kind of risks that I was curious about.
Okay. I'm going to read this and move my comments to 3141. If you are interested in digging into this, please do the same. Okay, Trent, I just saw you added KZG ceremony update. Can you give us that while we're here?
Yeah, real quick, related to 444, most of you are probably aware that it requires a trusted setup. But for anybody listening to the call live or the recording or reading the notes later on, just a quick update. We're finishing up the second audit with Sigma Prime. That'll be done probably this week. We'll respond to their changes, and then shortly after, hopefully in the next few weeks, or at least at the start of the new year, we'll be moving into the public contribution period. So if you, any teams or individuals, communities want to participate, please start sharing this. We're starting to ramp up some education, awareness stuff. We'll be doing Twitter spaces. So if you have a specific community that you want us to come talk to, Carl and myself will make ourselves available. We're more than happy to do that. Yeah, this is, as you probably know, trusted setups are, we want them to be as credible as possible, and that means getting as many people to participate. So that's where we're going to aim for this to be the largest summoning ceremony in the crypto space, at least. Probably let's say 8 to 10,000 contributions is what we're aiming for. So yeah, if you have any communities that you think might be interested, please reach out. We'd love to come talk to you. And if you are someone with, let's say, an academic, a amateur, or professional interest in cryptography, we're also running a grants round to get other people to write implementations, and that'll be happening after the public contribution period, but we want to get people aware of it. And please reach out if you're interested in writing your own implementation. From what I understand, it's relatively straightforward, not too crazy, maybe a day or two of work. So we'd love to have as many implementations as possible contributing to this, again, to make sure this is as credible and legitimate a ceremony as possible. Okay, that's all I have. Thanks.
Trent, do you know how long the public contribution period is going to be open?
We're aiming for at least 2 months, or right about there.
Got it. So like early to mid-January to like mid-March or something like that?
Yeah, roughly. We'll definitely have like a tighter, a better idea of what the bounds are as we get closer.
Great, cool. And just a quick update from my side, because I'm here. I've been talking internally at Coinbase. We're all aligned on the kind of like social content side, so that will all happen for sure. And then I'm working on the call to actions in the product. And I think that's going to happen as well.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
Great.
One extra thing to add here is that, like, if you do have any questions or doubts or whatever about this, like, please don't hesitate to ask. Like, this is a weird and fun thing to be doing. So like, let's make sure everyone understands it and is comfortable. Like, don't hesitate to reach out if you have any concerns about all of this or whatever. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other 484 discussion points for today? Great. We have a number of specification items across a few different domains. Age, you had a couple. The first was the AtNets revamp. Can you give us a quick on that?
Yeah, so I just wanted to raise a few things that we're planning on, I guess, releasing or adding into Lighthouse that can affect everybody else. So that AtNets revamp thing. So this is where we get a beacon node. So I guess if we just do Lighthouse, a specific beacon node subscribes to one or many subnets rather than it being tied to the validate account. So this is entirely backwards compatible. We can kind of just release this kind of thing tomorrow, but the overall effect on the network is that the density of the subnets, of the attestation subnets, is going to be reduced depending on how many beacon nodes, beacon node to subnets we have. So yeah, I want to just gauge other people's thoughts on doing this before going into any questions.
Any of the simulation analysis was that completed? I know y'all were working on it.
Yeah, so the simulation, so we've got like some simulation stuff, but it's not really for the attestation subnets. So I guess fundamentally the question I want to ask the other client teams is how they're managing peers in terms of like collecting the ones that are on subnets that you need. Because if we make this change and if you have just like a one-to-one mapping, one beacon node to one subnet, then if you have, let's say, 60 peers and you kind of collect them so that they're uniformly distributed across subnets, you still should at least have one on every subnet. I'm not sure if other client teams are doing this kind of logic. If we could also say one beacon node should subscribe to 6 subnets, and you'd have roughly the same density as you have on mainnet at the moment, and you shouldn't see a drop. You might actually see better improvements because every beacon node that you connect to will be subscribed to a subnet, rather than having these small groups of big nodes that you probably can't connect to because everyone else is trying to connect to them. So just trying to gauge other people's thoughts on whether it's a backwards compatible release that can kind of happen slowly in one client. That's not going to destroy the entire network in one hit potentially. Is there any thoughts on this by any of the other client teams? Is it going to do we think it's going to drastically affect other people's implementations?
Is it possible to test this out on Goerli first before mainnet?
Yeah, of course. It'll, like we do it on for sure. We'll do it on test nets to begin with, but it's mainly about node distribution, which is very different between the test nets and mainnet.
Yeah, so like on testnet, given our assumptions on node count, we might have to make the minimum 10 or something, whereas on mainnet, the target would be the minimum would hopefully be 1. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it'd be semi-artificial test. It'll show that the functionality works, but it won't show necessarily that the distributions work for mainnet.
I mean,
yeah.
The most interesting thing about this proposal to me was that it also changed the way we did sync committee subnets, because currently getting on the sync committee mesh is actually problematic. I mean, at least from what we've seen, that the sync committee meshes are sparsely populated and difficult to get into. Now, if this means that a lot of Lighthouse nodes suddenly will be less interested in forming meshes, then obviously it's going to have two effects. One is that Lighthouse will use less bandwidth than the other clients. And then I'm hoping that we will not end up in a situation like the sync committee subnets where like we get reports from people who look into it and then they couldn't get onto the mesh. I don't really know what a good model for releasing that is, but
right.
I
mean,
think
I wouldn't, even though we can do this in a backwards compatible way, I don't think we should do it unless we're confident that the entire network can do so, and that this is like the new specified honest behavior. The goal here would be to make sure all nodes are helping contribute while also, you know, having a better distribution and also potentially reducing bandwidth for the average node as well. So although I've proposed it, I don't know the best way to 100% validate it before we move forward.
Sure, I can post some statistics, which doesn't entirely help us all that much. One of the other, I guess, important metrics that's a little bit difficult to find is you've got these bunch of nodes that are subscribed to a lot, which is the ones that are going to be reduced. So the ones that are subscribed to 64 subnets, essentially, we would reduce those down to 1, and that's where the damage would mainly be. But the interesting metric that you kind of want to see is how many peers can connect to those nodes at the moment. Because if they, for example, if they only accept 50 peers and all their peer slots are full and new nodes can't connect to them anyway, they're not as valuable as what we think they are. I can try and get some more information. And
well, and there's a couple of things here. One, you can just lie. So nodes can just lie about adnets right now. So this, by making it just a function of your peer ID or some sort of external piece of data about yourself, you can now make it whether somebody's like doing their job or not, which is good. And it scales with the network, so the meshes, you know, naturally kind of become reinforced as there's more nodes in the network, rather than right now, if you had 100 times more nodes than validators, then you have even more trouble finding kind of like the sparse validator nodes. So like to reiterate, like there's a number of reasons, even in future constructions, that we don't want to just be relying more heavily on these nodes that are just connected to everything.
Yeah, another semi-safe way of doing this, if you just want to go on like kind of raw subnet density numbers, is if we said one beacon node connects to 6 or 7 subnets, then the density should be the same, but you should have a greater connectivity. So it should be a strict improvement in principle.
Yeah, I get worried. Yeah, just that would be a drastic for a home validator with one validator. That's probably a
Yeah,
drastic
that's the
increase in
downside.
bandwidth. So I think that I would only be comfortable moving to this if we can convince ourselves that on the order of 1 or 2 is safe.
Okay. I'll post on the issue and try and just post the current statistics, and we can make a decision on the issue. I can move on to the next one, unless there's anything else on that.
2 more small things. One is that I do think that clients should strive to follow the spec. So I'd love to see this added to the spec, and then we start releasing it to mainnet. Otherwise, we're on a slippery slope. Blah blah blah. The other one
Yeah, I
was
agree.
the point
That's what I meant, but we should be agreeing to this, even if it's backwards compatible, rather than just shipping this.
Yeah. The other thing was, I think, something we talked about at DEF CON, which is that the guarantee, I mean, it's still based on honesty, even after this change. Like, and I think what we discussed at DEF CON was basically that you can signal that you're, part of the subnet, and then you can just not join the mesh, even though you subscribe to the topic. So, like, if you want to be dishonest, there is still a loophole. The verifiability is, let's say, nice, but I wouldn't take it as foolproof. Like, it's not proof. You still need to verify that they're actually transmitting messages and stuff like this, and that goes into difficult territory.
It's difficult, but not impossible territory, at least in a heuristic zone, right? Like if I think you're on a mesh and you never give me anything from being on that mesh, then I can downscore you and move on.
No, but I can say that my mesh is full. I can prune you. And
Right,
and that's that I can't tell anything about.
Which is another reason to move on. But yeah. I mean, the worst, the main thing you can do is if somebody's lying to you about this is to not connect to them. And if they're also simultaneously just pruning you from the mesh, that's also a reason to not prioritize them and not connect to them. So
yeah, and like Nimbus,
and if they're doing that to everybody, they're going to be disconnected from most people.
Yeah, that's fair. But still.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Age, you had another one.
Yeah. So there's another kind of 2 ones. I won't take up too much time for everyone, but one of the other issues in terms of like connecting to all these peers that we need for the subnets is that there's a lot on the network that are behind NATs at the moment. There was a drive in DISP-V5 to build like an automatic NAT hole punching thing, which we're close to having kind of a version working, but that involves speccing out some extra fields in the ENR. So anyway, there's some work towards this, and if the other client teams are kind of interested in doing this kind of, it'll translate over to TCP at some point after a bit of specking, but essentially respecking some ENR fields, modifying Discovery v5, and adding like a TCP automatic hole punching is something that we're kind of working on, and would be handy if we get some other client teams for interop. I'll post something about that, or people can reach out if there's anything interested about that.
Oh no.
Yeah, so I have to
figure out a way. Okay.
It's okay. I don't have to.
The other thing is IPv dual stack support.
One question.
Yeah.
I saw that libp2p themselves are speccing out, what's it called, AutoNet 2.0. Is this somehow related or integratable?
Yeah, so my understanding with AutoNet 2.0, it's a entirely libp2p thing, so it's entirely over TCP, and you organize a relayer, and via that relay you organize the hole punching on TCP. So there was a spec yeah, for Portal in particular, that wanted to do some NAT hole punching, which is semi-spec'd in DISP-V5. Fundamentally, what happens is that you do a similar thing using relays. The hole punching usually works better over UDP, and once you have that, you essentially have a connection with a node over UDP, and I think quite easily we can use Discovery v5 to then essentially organize a hole punching through TCP. So we don't have to have the relay that you would need with AutoNAT and libp2p. Like we can skip a step because we have Discovery. Okay. Yeah.
Is there a link to the spec for this?
Kind of. I'll post it. So there's some stuff that we're semi making up, and some stuff that's in the DISP-V5 spec. So if you go to the DISP-V5 spec in PRs, I think there's a proposal there that's not entirely stable at the moment.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. So the last thing is IPv6 support. There's been people kind of hassling us for quite a while, which we have mostly figured out. But the first step to kind of onboarding IPv6 nodes is having IPv6 compatible boot nodes. So we were considering just enabling the Lighthouse boot nodes to having IPv6, which gives an onboarding for some nodes to then use IPv6 if they want to. We won't have IPv6 enabled in Lighthouse, but just having the boot nodes capable of doing it allows us to upgrade at some point in the future. I'm wondering if there's any thoughts about that, whether we should do that, should not do that. It'll be dual stack, so it's entirely backwards compatible, which means that it has an IPv6 and IPv4 IP address. It just means that in the ENR, you then have the option.
So all clients would have to update their boot node ENRs, right?
No other clients need to do anything. But if we do the Lighthouse ones, it just means there would, of all the boot nodes we have, 2 of them can advertise an IPv6, and so other IPv6 nodes can kind of advertise off them and contribute to the DHT. It's just an entry point.
Yeah, but Lighthouse boot nodes are like hard coded to different clients, right? So each client would have to update their Lighthouse boot node to have the IPv6 ENRs in them, right?
Yeah. So we would update the ENRs in each of the clients so that they're hard coded into the client, but I don't think that's entirely necessary, because when you initially connect it, when it does the handshake via ping, it realizes that the sequence number's out of date and it downloads the new one automatically.
Okay, all right, yeah.
So as long as you have the node ID essentially and the keys to connect to it, it'll update it automatically, even if it's not hard coded. But we should hard code it.
All right, sounds good to me.
So this doesn't require any sort of spec change. Does it require anything from other clients? Or are you asking them to also add IPv6 to their boot nodes?
No, so it doesn't do anything. Yeah, so no one else needs to do anything. The reason I'm bringing this up is in a previous conversation I've had with everybody, there was concern of having a network split. If there's IPv6 only nodes, then the IPv6 only nodes can only kind of talk amongst themselves essentially. By enabling IPv6 in the boot nodes, you now semi-enable the possibility for people to try and run these kinds of setups. In Lighthouse, we're only going to allow dual stack to begin with, to not segregate the network, but it opens up the possibility that IPv6 only nodes that start joining can kind of partition if anyone's attempting to run that kind of thing. So that's kind of why I'm raising it. I don't think that there's a downside other than that. It's just forwards compatibility. And if we update the nodes now, then we can upgrade later.
If you launch a dual stack version of a client, and the operator runs it behind a NAT that doesn't have some sort of auto hole punching, won't they naturally fall into IPv6 only? Because in most cases, because of the abundance of IPv6 addresses, lots of people get an IPv6 address, but they're natted behind IPv4. And so they may only have public access via IPv6. So is there a risk that you might accidentally partition even if you do dual stack?
Yes. Yeah. So I think that's right in that case. And so then those nodes probably won't find any peers, or they might, yeah, they might start petitioning themselves. Yeah. If there's a bunch of them doing it.
They'd find all the IPv6 peers, and they wouldn't be able to communicate with anybody via IPv4, not due to maliciousness, just due to their network was set up such that they're natted with IPv4 and they didn't punch a hole, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So
So at the moment, yeah,
they would end up accidentally being IPv6 only nodes, even though, is there anything we can do, I guess what I'm asking, is there anything we can do to try to make that not happen by accident? Like if someone wants to do IPv6, they have to kind of really go out of their way to do it, and they can't accidentally fall into IPv6 only.
I'd have to think about that. There's a bunch of changes in this NAT stuff that I'm talking about, where the local nodes identify what kind of NATs they're behind, whether it, in which if we had that functionality, potentially we can do some stuff, but I don't have an answer right now.
Okay.
I'd have to think about whether we can do that. But in principle, yeah, adding this support allows that kind of setup to petition themselves. Rather, at the moment, they would just not connect to anything.
On a similar note, and related to the previous point about not hole punching, a node that is dual stack, can they use the IPv6 to establish that hole for their own IPv4?
Yes, I think so, in principle. I think
that would be neat.
Yeah, I don't see why not. It depends on the relayer. If the relayer in between supports IPv6 in discovery, yeah. So I think it's possible. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, are you using a single socket or two sockets? Like a single dual stack or?
I think it comes out as two sockets. In the Rust library uses a single socket, but you have like essentially allow mapped address, which gives you a second socket.
All right. Yeah, we're looking to get IPv6 in there at some point as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think like semi-enabling it is one step closer, I guess, or at least just doing the boot nodes early so that they're in the DHT, but not having functionality otherwise. I'll make some noise on an issue that people can post. I'm just giving a heads up. Cool. That's it for me. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Okay, we have an old Beacon API PR on checkpoint sync APIs. Mikhail, I think you raised this, right?
Yeah. So checkpoint sync API that has been opened a while ago, as Danny said. So yeah, just want to give an update on it, and yeah, just before we move on with the update and the current state of the art with the checkpoint sync, just want to give a quick reminder on what was this PR about. So this PR basically proposed two endpoints. The first one was for state providers. The second one was for trust providers. The goal of state providers endpoint was to make it convenient for actual state providers to provide the state. Basically, it allowed to provide any finalized state that the state provider wants, which is within a week subjectivity period. The other endpoint allows to use the whatever the trust nodes that whatever nodes that you trust, and the trust is a subjective thing, but it allows you to verify the state that you have been supplied with and obtained from the actual state providers. So that's the overview of the proposal. And yeah, since that has been opened, there was the checkpoints tool developed, and yeah, basically the tool provides a convenient way for state providers to supply the state. It comes with like DOS protection. It comes with it can talk to multiple upstream beacon nodes and decide on whether the state is finalized, whether they agree on the finalized state, and then expose it. Also, it comes with the caching. So it basically suits very well the first goal of this proposal. And also, it provides more data than the state only, because some of CL clients can't bootstrap with the state only. Yeah, it's the problem that orthogonal to the checkpoints in KPI proposal, but anyway, the checkpoints tool also solve this problem as well. And for the second part, for the trust part, for the verification part, the checkpoints tool also provides this functionality. My main concern about that is that in this case, checkpoints tool become the single point of failure if everyone will use this for providing the trust, for allowing to verify the state that has been given to start with. And we have another PR that has been merged more or less recently, which equips every response in the Beacon API that responds with some chain data with finalized flag. So it basically there is an endpoint, a single endpoint that can be used for state verification. And yeah, probably the other way, without creating a single point of failure, would be to for those who wants to be a trust provider to make their own custom configuration and DOS protection and whatnot, and utilize this this finalized flag. That's the other way of doing this. Yeah, and basically my intention is to deprecate this proposal unless there are some, I know, some other opinions on that, and that's why I'm bringing it here, just to announce that it's about to be deprecated. And if you're interested in it because of whatever reason, just post a comment in the issue or say it here on the call. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to keep the issue of keep the PR open for, I don't know, until the end of this week, and just close this if somebody appears.
Got it. Okay. Another Beacon API PR that's been open for a while. Let's see, can you give us is the person who posted this here?
Yeah, I think so. It's me, Denny.
Oh, hey, sorry.
Hey. How are things, guys? So the pull request that I'm looking for kind of review and feedback and acceptance on relates to distributed validators and the aggregation duty. I'd say a lot of people on this call are familiar with the idea of distributed validator technology. It's making a one logical 32 ether validator run across multiple machines with threshold BLS keys and multi-sig like signing. And this PR addresses specifically the aggregation duty. Right now, the aggregation duty is decided by you signing the slot, which is called a slot signature, and then hashing it and doing like a modulus check. And the problem is with a distributed validator, every individual validator has a different BLS private key. So they all have different slot signatures and then all try and aggregate at the different time. The proposal or the kind of tweak we're working on, we've been, discussing this with a few people for a good few months now. Shout out Danny, Ben, Terence, and some of the others. But basically, as it's refined now, is it's one extra API call that the consensus layer doesn't have to implement. It'll be implemented at the middleware layer, and it would be opt-in to be used by validator clients if they turn on a feature flag. And it basically means when you're trying to decide if you're supposed to aggregate, you just send your partial slot signature to the consensus layer, and then it returns you a full slot signature, which you then hash and modulus check and continue on the flow as normal. So yeah, ask is have a look. Happy to answer questions now, but if we can get it accepted, then we can kind of talk with the client teams about getting it implemented in a branch kind of behind a feature flag and stuff. Thanks.
Okay, so the decision was to return whatever may be a full slot signature, and the validator client still does the local computation rather than just the middleware or the beacon node doing the computation on the full slot signature and returning true or false or a list of indices, right?
Correct. The reason we return it is because at second date, you have to make an aggregation proof. And in that aggregate, you have to actually put the proof, which is the fully assembled slot signature. So that's why we're sending it back instead of just sending back true.
Got it. And if you're implementing this on the, would you implement? So would beacon nodes actually implement this and just like have essentially a no op where you're just returning the value that was given, so the validator client doesn't really care if it's connected to middleware or beacon node, or would you not expect beacon nodes to implement this?
I don't really mind. I think in the pull request, I was suggesting we don't implement it for simplicity. And I was suggesting that a consensus client either return 501 not implemented to like explicitly say, no, we're not doing this, or potentially like a 400 to say, hey, you're potentially sending like this endpoint is meant to be for a distributed validator and you're hitting it off of a consensus client. You probably want a 400 to see what's going wrong here. So yeah, it could be implemented and be no op, but I was thinking either kind of a 501 or 400, depending on if we want to kind of tell the quote unquote user that something is up.
Got it. And in the event that this is not added to something like this is not added to the validator API, then that's going to make DVT teams probably be forking validator clients, which is not what we want.
Yeah, that's really the thing. The other option is that distributed validators don't implement aggregations and they don't get penalized themselves, but like network effectiveness would gradually decline if these make up like a larger percentage of the network. So yeah, you'd prefer it to be, additive to clients rather than be kind of pushed into making a kind of a custom validator.
Got it. There has been a bit of conversation I see on this issue, even through October. What do you see as the blockers here? Is it primarily generally thumbs up across these teams, or are there sticking points on some of the
Happy to ask them, but I think we're mostly aligned. I think the main change between the last flurry of stuff was this was suggested as a V2 endpoint for the subscriptions one, and it was going to be just like returning true. And then we said, actually, let's just bring it onto its own endpoint as standalone rather than have one endpoint kind of do two things. And normally when we move to a V2, that implies a deprecation of V1, which isn't the case here. So I think the main changes have been addressed, but good for client teams to cast a final eyeball over it and see that it's kind of all good and they're happy with the proposed changes.
Got it. So if your team has not taken a look at this, I do request you do so maybe by the end of next week. And if this issue is not resolved by the next call, then we will attempt to resolve it live. Sounds good?
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Okay, and Mikhail, Engine API spec improvement proposal.
Yeah. So there are two main questions for making this proposal apply to the spec. Yeah. So the first one is the engine gate capabilities method. Do we need this method at all? So the default and lazy in terms of like, probably not lazy, but less complex in terms of speccing out and engineering is the optimistic strategy suggested by Jacek. It can be already implemented, so we have everything for this. So it's basically if CL knows that there's going to be an update on the L side and it starts to support, for example, new payload with two method, and yeah, it starts to send the new payload with the method to the EL. If EL doesn't support this method, it returns the corresponding error, and then CL falls back to the previous version. So that's basically the optimistic strategy, try and fall back on error. And
whereas
CL does,
some scenarios, fallback wouldn't even be an option, right? It'd just be kind of a critical failure, depending on the functionality between the two versions.
Right, you mean that at some point the V2 will be a must, right? Is that what you mean?
Right, you could imagine certain structure of the data is just critical for the V2 or the V3.
Yeah, right.
Compared to
that's correct. Yeah, that's correct. But there is like a rough consensus that we should try our best to make the next version backwards compatible with the current one. So it's somehow, yeah, it should support, and probably in most of the cases we can do it.
When you say current version, when you say current version backwards compatible with the previous one, you explicitly mean only one version back, so we would not support backwards compatible with two versions back?
Basically, that was the agreement. I don't think we should, if there is no need for this, I don't think we should support the engine API versions that are like pretty older than two versions from the current one. I actually don't see any reason for doing it so.
Okay. I just want to make sure we avoid getting into the situation that like the execution layer teams are in, where their gossip protocol is very frustrating because you have to support every previous version. And so it'd be nice.
That's the main point of not supporting, because this is similar to supporting all hard forks that have ever happened, like in terms of engineering burden. Okay, so and getting back to the engine API stuff, to get capabilities method. So get capabilities basically returns you all methods that currently supported by the EL. And what CL can do with this method is just calling this method in the background with some timeout, say like 5 minutes or whatever number of minutes are reasonable. And once it sees that the new method is added, and CL just switches to the new one and uses this new one once it's available. So that's one of the ways to utilize this method. So the main question is like, to CL client devs, will they use it? Is it useful for them? If not, so we'll likely to use this optimistic strategy, as it does not introduce any additional complexity. So CL client devs, yeah, please go to your code bases and check out the engine API clients, and try to in order to understand whether gate capabilities method would be beneficial or not. So any questions or comments to this part? Yeah, as Danny said, that probably sometimes we will have to prepare the payload for EL that will not be able to, and we will not be able to make it backwards compatible, this thing we're considering. So I'll take a look at this edge cases, potential edge cases. Okay. And the other part is the basically decomposition, the way that we want to decompose the spec documents. Obviously, we do not want to have one specification document for every method ever spec'd out. It's just like it's just inconvenient. So there are two approaches to the breakdown. One is the breakdown them by fork. So whenever a new fork is added, we have a new document that spec out the new methods that are related to this fork. Was proposed originally. The other way to do this is to break down by functionality. So if method works, a group of methods working with payload goes to one document. The other group of methods that works with the fork choice updates goes to the other one. Was proposed by Light Client. I just did like a couple of examples. You can take a look at them. And yeah. Both have downsides and upsides, so probably functional is more convenient for developers. Just take a look at those two.
I'm a bit biased towards forks because it's the beast that I know, but I'm sure both end up working fine.
In my experience with documentation, you should always pick the one that the person actually writing the documentation wants to do, because it is really hard to find people to write documentation. So bend over backwards to make things easy for them.
Yes. Well, what's good about functional thing is that you will have like, say, new payload V1, then V2 and V3 in one place, and you can incrementally define the specification of V2 based on top of V1. So that's probably, and it's easier to read and easier to reason about when you have everything in the same screen. Yeah, that's the main upside that I can see in this approach.
Yeah, I get it. I think my bias comes from the writer side. You know, what do I want this new thing to look like? And assuming the writer probably knows what the old thing looks like. But I'm that's just my opinion. I will cast it to the wind. I'm pretty happy either way. Thank you,
Also,
Mikhail. This is really good stuff.
Yeah, thanks. And also in this functional breakdown, I tried to to add. We have the proposal also has this table of methods where they described and the statuses of those methods, whether the method is deprecated or final or a draft. So instead of this, I just tried to write a status of each method alongside to the specification of this method. So it's probably easier to maintain and easier to work with. Do not create more entities that you should spend your attention on. Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
So
it does look like we're honing in on this. I know that you did want to present it to all core devs. Is that kind of the final blocker in getting this ironed out? Mikhail?
So sorry, then can you repeat?
So I know that you did want to present this on all core devs as well. Is that the final blocker in getting this ironed out, or what are the substantial blockers at this point?
Oh, yeah, I don't think it's a blocker actually. So I would like to see all devs to chime in on the get capabilities, and basically we can debate on the the decomposition, the way of decomposition, like in a chat or whatever. And yeah, if get caps is going to be beneficial, so we'll have it. And then we will need to ask EL client devs whether they like really want to implement this. Yeah, and support as well.
Got it.
Yeah, we do care about EL devs as well. So yeah, it probably makes sense, you know, to just give a quick announcement on ACD, but I'm sure that, I don't know. Yeah, that's up to.
Got it.
Probably quick announcement will be useful.
So if you have strong opinions on get caps, chime in ASAP.
But I would not say that not announcing this on ACD is a blocker.
Okay. Any other items for today?
A small quick one real quick. Clientdiversity.org has 2 data sources for consensus clients, and they're wildly different. Do we know which one's correct, or which one's closer to correct, or which one's most likely to correct?
Is this?
This is the Lighthouse.
Okay, so no, one is a crawler and one is a crypto. One is a block proposal attempt to figure out who's proposing blocks. So one's going to map to the stake weight, and one's going to map to node. I'm looking at this crawler data, and it looks very wrong, based off of my understanding and other crawler data. So one, they're different. Two, one of them looks wrong.
And do you know which one is the one that looks wrong? It's the one that says Lighthouse is.
Sorry, so block print is the one that tries to analyze validator stake distribution. The Migo Labs one is a crawler, which would give us the node distribution, and I'm pretty sure that is wrong. And I think our understanding is block print is pretty good. There's going to be some error, but
okay, that was it. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not certain if there's a crawler that's in good shape. There is Node Watch, which is presumably their crawler as well, but I don't think that's been updated or maintained in a while. So, but gives a different view. Okay, yeah, anything else for today?
I can just make a quick announcement about Nimbus. So we'll be pushing out a release, I think today, hopefully. Big change in it. We're finally publishing a separate validator client. Like we've had one in testing for like forever, but this is the release where it makes the official cut. So we'll keep the integrated validator mode around. We welcome everybody that wants to run a separate validator client to join the Nimbus family as well.
Nice. Yeah, I think the machine separation is pretty valuable for a number of users. Cool. Anything else?
Just a question for Nimbus, as we are also working on separating the validator client for Grandina. And so the built-in validator client, is it going to use the API to run, or did you internally did you keep the internal access to the beacon node? That's a question for Nimbus.
So from a purely technical architecture point of view, the internal one uses like a private version of the API. Obviously, it doesn't go through JSON or any of that stuff. And it also uses a couple of shortcuts, which makes it more efficient. Like a lot of efficiency in Nimbus and initially was based on these assumptions. And like gradually what we've been doing is making sure that without losing efficiency, we can expose the same kind of data to the validator client. So internally, there are a couple of assumptions that one can make when running the validator client inside the beacon node, which makes it both a little bit safer. Like there are errors that simply cannot happen. So from that point of view, the internal validator client code remains more simple, and we're going to keep offering it. But that said, like the external validator client uses the same implementations, shall we say. It's just that there's a couple of extra failure modes that result from the fact that there's a socket in between, and from the fact that there are some like tiny pieces of information that are not exposed via REST that a validator client running inside the beacon node can make use of.
Okay, so just to summarize, so you will try to keep the internal validator client more or less as is, that slightly leverages this position of being internal in the client, built-in in the client, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it's still a great mode to run if you're just running a few validators, because you only have one process. Well, now you have 2 or 3, but
I believe other clients are not following this approach, and the more like going with this public API only approach. Is it right?
Yes, I think also offers internal validator clients.
Perry, you want to know, is the internal going to have long-term support on Nimbus?
Yeah, it's staying around. Like there's no reason to remove it. What we've done is generalize the internal one to external one. And I mean, it's also possible to mix and match Nimbus with, you know, Teku or Lighthouse validator clients, because they all use the same REST API.
Got it. Okay, anything else for today?
Yes. Happy Beacon Chain anniversary.
Yes. Very good. So far, so good. Okay, on that note, we will close. Thank you, everyone. We will meet 2 weeks from today, and then we will take off right around New Year for this call. So talk to you all in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks to everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks all.
Bye.